If you were to read any popular history of modern Britain, you will most likely be told that until September 1997, it was a buttoned up and emotionally repressed nation, unable to show public displays of emotion whatsoever, certainly not grief. After one tragic evening in Paris, nothing was the same again. Since then, it has been a country much more in touch with itself, one where shrines to dead heroes would become commonplace. And yet, 2.5 years before the death of Diana, and admittedly on a different scale to the palaces of London, the flowers and scarves poured from the Ibrox gates out onto Edmiston Drive. At this club of all clubs, renowned for its stoicism and a deeply held suspicion for sentimentality, all that seemed to have changed. Whether at lunchtime or deep into the night, men, women, and children gathered to leave something behind and to take it all in, where the only noise to be heard was the passing of a car or the catching of a tearful breath. Rangers had said farewell to legends in the recent past, Willie Waddle and Willie Thornton to name but two, but this was different. Those were old men from a distant time. For many, standing in silence in that cold, damp March weekend, it felt like Davie Cooper had been playing for Rangers the previous week. Such was the vibrancy of his legacy that had been captured and replayed in every news bulletin for days. It hit hard not just because it was a shocking and tragic loss for a relatively young, fit and healthy man, but because his talent could have seen him jettison Ibrox quickly, but his heart ensured that he couldn't. I think the continent may have suited me with the amount of time you get on the ball, Cooper said in his last ever interview. But I don't look back. I was a Rangers supporter and I spent the bulk of my career at the team I loved. You take your chances. I had a great career. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Cooper's celebrations were always in sync with the everyman supporter. He was from those terraces. What he'd often just done seconds before, however, was as if he was from another world. To discuss Cooper's passing, the impact on this season, and its conclusion, I'm joined by David Edgar from Liverpool. How are we, David?
In Liverpool, not from. I don't think my throat could
You're
cope
joining
with
us
the accent
from
full time.
Liverpool.
I am. I'm joining you from Liverpool. For those of you listening in the future, it's the week of Rangers Champions League trip. You'll know how it went. At the moment, we don't. But yes, I'm in Liverpool. But dominant waits for no man, so it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, David. And Alan Bradley. Good evening, Alan.
Yeah, good evening. I'm in Wishaw, not in Liverpool. And if things do go wrong tomorrow night, David, it's on you.
No, I'm really not taking anything to do with this result. That's one. Yeah. No.
Okay, well, let's go back to this. Let's go back to the spring of 1995. Wednesday, 22nd of March, then Davie Cooper was out on the AstroTurf pitches next to Broadwood, the home of Clyde FC, of course, near Cumbernauld, where he's showing 14 youngsters how football should be played. He was doing a free kick routine, of all things. He was involved with this STV production, of course, called Shoot with Charlie Nicholas and Tommy Craig, and he said to Charlie Nicholas just a few moments before, how about we go for a pint after all this is done. Minutes later, he was lying on the floor, motionless. One of the crew eventually shouted, everyone thought it was a joke. Someone shouted, "Okay, Davey, the joke's over." And blood appeared from his mouth. It was clear the situation was infinitely more serious. Quickly rushed to Monklands before being referred to the Southern General's Institute for Neurological Sciences. Early signs weren't good. Fans stunned, trying to digest it. That was nothing, of course, compared to friends and family. Ali McCoist could barely speak as he phoned Ian Durrant to say that he was heading up to the hospital where he would, with Derek Johnson, I think, be there all night until the news we were fearful of eventually came in this little hospital campus room, a lecture theatre, where the consultant neurosurgeon delivered the news everyone had feared. David, that was a Wednesday over a Thursday, middle of the week. I was still at school. Can you remember those couple of days digesting that there had been a hemorrhage, and even if Cooper survived it's going to be very, very difficult for him, and of course that death was a very real possibility that Wednesday evening.
Yeah, I heard about it when coming in from school. Although I was a wee bit older by then, I was still kicking about, and just couldn't believe it. He didn't seem old enough, really. And at the time, you're when you're in your teenage years and whole life ahead of you. As you get older, I think, and you begin to talk about your own mortality, but I'm still not quite there yet, and I'm now 6 years older than Davie Cooper ever was, and that I think as I get older, it almost reinforces this level of tragedy for me about how he's taken. I was just stunned, and I don't use the word lightly. I was just stunned. I struggled to take it in. My family were struggling to take it in. Again, he was so young and he was so vibrant, and he was doing punditry at the time. If you remember, he would do Scott Sport and Scott Sport Extra Time
Yeah.
regular, and he looked great. I mean, he really did. He was an attractive guy, and he looked great. He was really well spoken. You just couldn't quite get your head around it. And there was that waiting, and you're praying for a miracle. But I think that there was the suspicion that even if he came through for a little bit, it was unlikely to be with any great quality of life, which you're still hoping. You're hoping that just, the doctor appears on the TV and he says, well, that things went well. But I think there was that sense that it probably wasn't going to end like that. And then just the shock and the grief, because as I've mentioned on here before, when I first started watching football, it was Davie Cooper and then Ali McCoist. But it was Davie Cooper right at the start for me. He was the shining light in that Rangers team when Ali was struggling as he first arrived. So I just couldn't get my head around it. And as I say, rather than the years passing and it actually becoming going fading to memory. And I think as I get older, and I remember passing the anniversary, the year that I was 39, and thinking that this is how he should still be with us now. Never mind having lost him almost 30 years ago. It just seems so incredibly cruel that someone so special and so talented had just been taken from him, and just out of nowhere, just completely out of nowhere. It was one of these things that can happen to anybody, but it couldn't have happened to Davie Cooper. Surely he wasn't.
Yeah.
You said at the start, he didn't come from the same place as we did in terms of the level of gifts we'd been given, and it's so sad. It just even all these years later, it still is quite upsetting to talk about, because he shone so bright, and you just couldn't imagine that light going out instantly, and that's what happened.
Alan, David's mentioned stunned and shock, and that really was the prevailing reaction. I mean, sudden tragic death happens, of course it does, and even if you compare it maybe with some of the situations we've suffered as a support recently, the time of recording, notably Andy Gorham, Walter Smith, we knew they were unwell. We'd maybe even prepared at some level that this could happen actually in the near future. But Davey's right about how bright and effervescent Cooper still was. Very fit guy, but it was, a subarachnoid hemorrhage that's bleeding between the membranes that line the brain. It can occur without any hint of a warning. And because of that, by the way, a successful operation just wasn't an option. It just caught everybody completely by surprise, Alan. But I'll go into the memories in a moment. But for you've seen the whole Davy Cooper story just because of your generation. You saw him as one of the young guns in '77. What are your recollections of that immediate response?
Just devastated, to be honest with you, Martyn. Just hearing it on the news, and as you're saying, when you heard, what had happened to him, again, I don't know, you just knew within yourself, as David said. I mean, you were like praying, something will turn, it will improve and so on. But I think deep down, obviously, you sort of knew this just really sad news was coming, and things were going to be confirmed. And I think it's a good point that you make as well. I can still remember as a 14-year-old leaving my house in Wishaw to go and see Rangers playing Clydebank in those 4 games that I went to. And he was obviously playing. He was seen as the Scottish George Best. So I remember going, and we drew 3 each, and kind of Cooper scored equaliser. I then remember going to Kilbowie, which I'd never been to. You know, with my dad, it was this old ground. He scored an equaliser. I think Greg scored. Then we'd drawn nothing each back at ours. And then we played the next day at Firhill. So I saw this guy, and it was like, geez, you know, right away, everyone, and I think even at the time, the Rangers team and all that were going, this, you know, everyone was talking about this exciting person. So then obviously we sign him. But I had him in my life pretty much and honoured, and, you know, actually to have been, to pretty much see all of Davie Cooper's games, because I was going all of the time. So all of that 12-year period. And it's funny, it's like the kind of grief, you know, we see these things happen now, and people always say, why are you getting upset? Because you didn't really know them. But from 14-year-old to 26, 27 at Rangers alone, Davie Cooper, you were seeing him every week. He was a local guy as well. Martyn came from Hamilton. You know, so we kind of knew him. I knew some people related to Davie Cooper as well. Saw him doing the treble, the doubles, winning cups. I mean, 7 League Cups. I mean, that was like his trophy. The 3, obviously, Scottish Cups with us to the 3 titles. I was a postman in Motherwell, early 20s, and Davie Cooper's was in my route as well. So when I was going down Ladywell Estate, and he was standing waiting there, and Ian Ferguson lived in Newart Hill, the other one, he would pick Davie Cooper up in his Capri and so on. Sometimes I would talk to him as well. I used to go jogging around Strathclyde Park, and Coop would be around there with the bag, you know, to try and kind of get himself back. And so to me, it was just absolutely devastating. Even now, just talking about it, and I've had a few Rangers heroes through my time, but it's just when I look back and all of those things that you've seen in all of the videos, all the goals, all the free, you know, whatever it would be, as I say, I really just feel so blessed that actually it was a big, big part of my life, you know, all the time following Rangers. But no, it's just such a sad. I mean, he played for the club, obviously, that, you know, that he loved, and my God, we loved him as well. Martyn is just what a talent. And it was a throwback as well to when Scotland had these, whether it be Jimmy Johnson, Willie Henderson, like real unique, you know, type of players. And he was the last, I think, of that, you know, yeah.
You know, the thing about
this is the conversation we've been having over the past few weeks. Yeah, that they're not producing these, but even before this tragic event, where are these players? Where's the next Davie Cooper? Because it already felt, we talked about it in last week's show, that when he announced his retirement, which was just a couple of months before, they're saying, right, and Laudrup has brought this really into the consciousness. Where are these individuals? This is what Scotland did. Maybe not tactically sound as units, and maybe didn't look after ourselves in the most professional way, etc., but we produced these gallus, Tanner Baugh kind of merchants that just had something about them. And I mean, Cooper's death underscored that, whether it was much power as one of his free kicks. It was a kind of final full stop on this conversation, wasn't it?
We lost a lot of talent through the 80s due to teacher strikes, because that meant there was no football. And you'll remember at the time as well, there were a lot of people being moved out. So the old kind of street football, as a lot of people moved to the suburbs, the environment was changing, the places to play. When I was growing up, it was difficult to find to play 11-a-side, you know, to find an organised team. Your school didn't do it. So that was one of the reasons, I think. And then I remember seeing these programmes, Martyn, as you would as well, in the early 90s, you know, Wither the Scottish Player, and there was the bemoaning the street football. It made for better lifestyles because kids were moving to much nicer areas, but, you know, maybe they did lose that 40-a-side game where, you know, if you wanted to touch the ball, you had to...
The schemes, playing one scheme against the other.
And you had to be good at retaining the ball if you ever wanted a touch of it. There's a couple of things I just want to throw in about Davie Cooper as another reason why I loved him. One, he was called David, which I loved. 2, he didn't drive. Alan, you just mentioned there. You just mentioned there that he
picked him up.
Fergie picked him up. And by the way, I'm not sure I can think of anything cooler in the entire history of the universe than Davie Cooper in a Capri. I just there's an image. And 3, Ali had said this a lot. He said the thing about Coop was he loved his hometown. He loved if you wanted to go out on a night out with Davy, you went out to his locals because he wasn't coming into town. And he said it's the power of the guy that we all went. These footballers with Victorias and Dolly Birds throwing, they all trekked it to Hamilton to go out with Davie Cooper. That's the power that Davie Cooper had an aura about him, didn't he? That Laudrup was the same as a footballer. You mentioned the word gallus, Martyn. I think we tend to think gallusness as being a Scottish thing and only Scotsmen. I don't think it's true. I think it's a quality. That's just their name for it. I'm sure there are countries have their own name for it. But it is that sort of, it's not about height. It's not about physical stature. It's just this confidence, this coolness. And
so watch this, isn't it? As they do
and of course, insouciance about doing amazing things, and I think that's maybe the Laudrup comparison, because he was obviously physically different to Davy. He played in a kind of different way, played in a different era, but it was that essential. My God, he's the coolest guy. And they were both the type of person that as footballers, they were head turners, that even when they didn't have the ball, you were sort of looking to see where they were and almost counting down the minutes until they did get the ball. And I'm so pleased that Cooper got to play in a good Rangers side again. That the starting point of this show, the 86, because he was the only, when I first started watching Rangers, Alan, you'll know better than me, but he was the only thing in that team worth watching. And Ian Ferguson did all right near him, and Ali came in and started okay, but the guy that you turned up at Ibrox, the guy that you watched in the telly, pin your hopes on, was Davie Cooper. And to then
see him and Bobby, him and Bobby Russell, David. Yeah. When the first came, I remember that very first season, we're 2-0 down against Celtic. We won 3-2. The old Rangers ran them right behind the goals, just at the terrace, and we scored the third. The play that they had, everyone says he was never quick, but on his head, he was playing balls through. Okay, I mean, just some of the stuff he done, and it was all so magical as well. I mind even, did we not play Fairnord or someone in it was absolutely soaking wet, horrible friendly thing? I don't know if Rutulet or someone was playing, but my God, some of the stuff.
This is where the Rutulet quote later on comes from, because he'd also played against them, and he said he's one of the best players he'd ever seen, and that got obviously replayed a few years later.
It's a deep and genuine and abide. It's not just
Well, it wasn't a soundbite for.
He still said every year
on
Cooper's on sadly that anniversary, Rutulet tweets out one of my heroes and sadly missed, and he met up with him during his day. It's a lovely and amazing. It's a respect between guys who none of the rest of us are a member of that club.
Aye. Yeah,
and he wasn't ball-headed. The thing about Davie Cooper as well, he knew within himself, he knew he was so good, but he never walked about there with a "look at me, I'm so." And he brought young players on. You talk about some,
Sorry, I want to come back to that. I think there's maybe something in that just in a minute. There's two other things I want to pick up on just before we do move on and go on with the season. The reaction. Now, Davie, I don't think I'm overly emotional guy. As I said, we've lost some Rangers greats recently, time of recording. I was deeply saddened by that and deeply affected, but I don't think over emotional about it. I found this very difficult to revisit and write about and talk about, because like you, and I'm obviously slightly younger, 86, 87 is my starting point. That's where my consciousness begins, and it is Cooper for me. He's first, before Ali, even before Sunus really becomes this kind of god. It's Cooper with that ball to Durant on that first televised game.
League Cup final.
It's Cooper with the cup final penalty and McCoist lifting him up. The Rangers fans going berserk in the background, just out of focus is blurred, obviously. And the look of affection with two geniuses in their own way, but Rangers.
Bears.
And there's something, inmates, yeah. And interesting when we were doing the research and come across that picture where the floral tributes and the hat and the scarves and the strips. And we are we have been conditioned to think that until Diana, which obviously just a couple of 2.5 years later, that didn't really happen. Now, Hillsborough did, but that was so monstrous in its tragedy that's almost separate. Just for a single human life, British people didn't really do that. There's maybe the John Lennon thing as well, but that was a lot more in America. And yet, here it is at our gates and our club, as I said, not really with a tradition for that. We always kind of mock the over-emotionalism of others. I went up that night, asked my dad if we could go up. It must have been 10, half 10. I wanted to put a top down. It was my Adidas equipment home one. I wish I'd kind of kept it now, but I wanted to put something
down
because you see, it was my first, and it was there were a few there, and it was just absolute silence. And then also, of course, the weekend, not a game that weekend. It was a lot of international stuff. That this thing just builds and builds and builds. It's not something we think of ourselves doing. I don't think at that time. I think we forget that happened really, because it's kind of out of sync with that. As I said, that modern British history story, and it's certainly out of sync with Rangers at that time. Did any of you go up?
I went up. I went up that night on the train, and it was, I wasn't alone. There were a lot of people getting on. You could see them, and it was similar to yourself, Martyn. Laying down tops and flowers as well. That you could see the stops on the way up for Coinning, which Coinning, Johnson, Paisley, Bell's getting on, and then run to the subway. Not really talking, maybe smiling if you see that nodding way when a Rangers top gets on and DC's yours, kind of, but not really talking. I think that some things are just so universal and shocking that they strike a chord in all of us, and it doesn't matter what you like as a person individually. It's just something that resonates with all of us. He was 39 and he was as fit as a fiddle, and suddenly he isn't there anymore, and that's everyone thinking it could be me, or it could be someone I love. Then there is something I think we talked a lot about when Motor was here, about this. You can be one of these cynical people who especially online, maybe likes to be controversial and says stuff like, "Oh, how can you grieve for someone you didn't know?" Well, Walter Smith gave me some of the happiest moments of my life. Yeah. He's had, and Davie Cooper was the same. They've done more for my happiness than a lot of my family members, and I don't think that it certainly wasn't contrived in any way. It certainly wasn't a decision that was spoken about. We certainly didn't have things like social media in the day. It was just your reaction, I think, was the reaction of just, I need to go somewhere and do something about this, be it a Rangers supporters club or Ibrox is the place we gravitate to in good times as well as bad. When we win the league, when it's where we go. It is that almost church for our for us, yeah. It's sort of like a secular church for us, and I just think that it wasn't in any way. It was spontaneous, and it was just this sense of, I'd like to do something because I'm powerless and I'm sad, and I don't feel it's enough to mark it in the house. I've got to go and do something and be somewhere, and that sort of gesture to me is incredibly powerful, because it wasn't mapped out. Now we kind of know what to do, and that doesn't make the days any sadder, and it doesn't make the reactions any less genuine. But there is
maybe there is.
There is a model of it.
There's a lot of grief shagging going on.
No, there is. I'm talking more specifically about us when. And look, there's still absolutely. We're in the age of social media. There is a performative
Performative
Yeah,
aspect.
there is a performative aspect to everything these days, because you can do things instantly. You can communicate with people. You go on social media and you see thousands of people, and an opinion can form in seconds. These were just people from all over the country, Martin. They hadn't met up. They hadn't watched the telly yet. They'd come in from their work, heard the news, and gone with no second thought. It was literally an occasion where thousands of people had the same idea at the one time. And I do put it down to the shock value, how much he meant to us, but also that, without getting too philosophical, that frightening reminder of how fragile this whole thing is.
Yeah.
And it is one of those nights you hug your loved ones closer.
Well, David, that when you said, I went in the car and I went up the loft in Margetson, what are you doing? And I had an old scarf that I had from that time, from the early 70s, with, at the time, you used to sew patches and things on it. Margetson, what are you doing? I went up and got that. I just went in the car myself and just drove in there and just kind of quietly put it down. Now, the only other person I've ever done that for, up until around about that time anywhere after, was Big Wallace. Again, just because maybe my age. And again, you're saying it with Davey, I'm like 33 as well at the time, and as you say, it was just such a shock. And I always go on, if you'll hear me, I'll continue the golden thread. There's certain characters in our history, with that whole Struth, all the way through, the likes of Big Greg, but Davy Cooper I held the same as, and to me it's just like, I don't know, it's a touch back to my grandfather, my great-grandfather and so on. And as you say again, honestly, I must have seen him hundreds and hundreds of times. All of those, the Dryborough Cup final, all the beautiful things that Davy Cooper did. I also saw him doing we would centre it, would go back to Davy and he would just, and play it away, and you would go, he's not in the mood. But see the minute I went back to him and he dropped a shoulder, everybody just went, here we go. And fortunately, I saw more of those than the other ones,
The reaction is almost universal, whether it's former teammate, opponent, the media, ordinary fan. Cooper was an introvert, quiet guy, shunned the limelight that he could have hogged easily. He refused to deal with the media early in his career, but warmed to it later on. He was a great pundit, actually. He had a kind of dry wit about him, as well as good observations. This was a player who was one-footed, terrible in the air, poor in the tackle, slow in a race, but all that became irrelevant if the ball landed at his left foot. There were hints of green and yellow in that sea of blue as the tributes kind of piled up. Like, Cooper never had his love for Rangers or what that was all about. He wouldn't even entertain Jock Stein's request that he come and join Celtic, but he was still at Clydebank. It just wasn't on the radar at all. And yet there was still that respect for him as a player. And the tributes, again, had this commonality of, when are we going to see that again? Paul McStay talked about, the level of skill that we don't have in the Scottish game at the moment. Chick Young finished his piece by saying, the last of the great winners. God bless you, Davy. I know not when we'll see your likes again. And even Rangers fans, so often consumed by the final score and nothing else, appeared to be gripped by a kind of brief moment of self-reflection. Robert McElroy, the Rangers historian, started his piece by using that famous quote from the American sports writer Grantland Rice, for when the one great scorer comes to mark against your name, he writes, not that you won or lost, but how you played the game. And even the most cynical fan I think I've ever met, or of course in Fall, the Govan Hill Gub, he finished his tribute to Cooper by saying, is Rangers Football Club today, a club going for 7 leagues in the trot, any better off than when the absolute shambles of a club we were 10 years ago that had Davy Cooper and nothing else? Winning isn't everything. It has taken the tragic death of David Cooper to make me realise this. Alan, when I was putting my thoughts together for this, and Cooper, and he never made too much of it, but he would grumble about his career or maybe not being as appreciated as he maybe should have been in Scotland. It reminded me a lot of David Holmes in the work that we'd done earlier in this series. He does think that he is underappreciated. But, is that a nature of the quiet, introverted personality, that if you do want your legacy to be, or maybe your legacy now, because death obviously changes things, but in life, if you want that appreciation, sometimes you do need a personality that goes out and hogs it. Because Cooper did. He felt, he described the 5 seasons under Greg as 5 wasted years, someone who didn't understand how to use them. But he didn't go to Italy when he could. You know, he didn't have that kind of chip of ice in the heart that said, I'm ambitious, I'm going to go somewhere where my talent can be fully kind of recognised. Can you have it both ways?
No, I think there was a wee bit of the, as you say, not, being quiet and not actually pushing and kind of shouting out about it. There was an element of that. I think what went against Davy Cooper, unfortunately, was that period, as you say, latterly after maybe the first season of Big Greg into the second one, they didn't get on anyway. There was definitely a split, I think, between Big Greg and Cooper. Funnily enough, when Big Wallace came back, when would that be, in 83 or whatever, but when Wallace came back, there was a resurgence then, and Davy Cooper then became a ever-present again. But I think also because of the players that he was playing with during those times, if he had been playing, like I think David mentioned it, obviously in Wallace's second treble season, at that point when they were flying, and a bit of the first Greg one, but then later on you'll see the first one is Sunus as well, he kind of comes back in. So I think there was a bit of both about maybe the way Davy did kind of keep things quiet and so on. But I also think if he had been in a better team with maybe some other, better players around him, then it would probably have magnified, just made things look better. Yeah.
See, for what it's
Back
worth.
to football then.
Just on that. See, before that, this literally just a tiny wee thing, but NASA this year, Gordon Smith was talking about he got sold to Brighton without knowing that he was going, and basically got hauled in by John Gregg and like Jarowski. And when he got to Brighton, he said the manager said, I tried to buy you and Davie Cooper, and Greg said I could have one, but not the other, and I picked you. He said, and then he watched a Scotland game, and he came in the next day at training and went, and I signed the wrong one. But yeah, I just thought that was a nice. But again,
he was never going to break.
He was never.
He can't drive from Hamilton.
Well, I agree with you on your point about. Can you have it both ways? No, he couldn't. You can't in any life say I was unhappy for 5 years and I did nothing about it, and therefore it's someone else's fault. It's he could have moved. He was never going to move. Look who he moves to after Rangers, right? Davy Cooper.
Tommy McCoy, basically.
There's a modern equivalent, Leighton Baines. Who wouldn't move from the northwest. And if you look at his clubs, Wigan, Everton, he point blank he could have gone to Arsenal, who were much bigger club than Everton, and a really good Arsenal side, and he chose not to. So he was in the place he was born to be in, and I don't think those regrets were long lasting. I think they were maybe fleeting thoughts.
Yeah, well, I think they were genuine at the time, but as you said, Davey, him having another go at this with a good Rangers team, I think if Sunus had not arrived, I wonder how lacking and regret he may have been at the end of his career, because at least he had that again, and someone who did appreciate him and would use him. Walter Smith and Alan McCoy led the mourners at the funeral. McCoy very bravely got to the end of his eulogy by describing Cooper as a remarkable talent and a fine man, but it was Smith, as it is so often, who found the perfect words. God gave him a great gift. I don't think he'd be disappointed in the way it was used. And as it happened, Rangers weren't due to play between Cooper's death and the funeral, so nothing was moved around as the club absorbed that shock. And Smith invoked Cooper's memory and his style and his kind of qualities by pleading with his team to wrap this title up in style, and they duly did. We got 3 games to look at. I mean, it took them 11 seconds. Davy up at Tannadice to take the lead in the first game back. Gordon Jury latching on to that through ball and just beautifully dinking it over the goalkeeper's head. And then, not many minutes later, Alan McLaren's free kick. My goodness, we didn't see many of those in his time. It's an absolute bullet of a free kick.
Not many remember this. See, when and people who were about at the time, maybe because I don't know, it wasn't live on the telly or whatever. But I've spoken to people about this, and do you remember Alan McLaren's 40-yarder? And people are like, no, Alan McLaren. I'm telling you, to the point where I doubted myself that I'd witnessed this.
It was like Cooper against Hibs, ironically, in the second leg one at Ibrox. That just blasting it, wasn't it? It's an absolute screamer.
It's in the list of best Rangers goals nobody ever talks about.
It's certainly very fitting. Anyway, we'll try and bunch these up because Rangers, we won 2-0 that day. We then beat Aberdeen 3-2 at Ibrox the following weekend, and it was a game that had something that the season had lacked, which was just fun. Rangers were 2 up early on. Aberdeen had managed to pull it back to 2-2 before half time, and then Big Hateley, who'd come back that day, first game I think since Hogmanay, since Boxing Day, he pops up with the winner. Rangers then turning on the style, Davie, and kind of getting towards this end game. But these two opponents, the new firm, of course, Dundee United and Aberdeen, bottom of the table, both of them. Golach gone. It's Billy Cooper, former Rangers reserve team coach, is in charge of Dundee United. Roy Aitken, of course, in charge of Aberdeen. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. I mean, this was bizarre, actually. I mean, you would expected that drop off, but this was pretty dramatic from both of them, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, because especially Aberdeen, Dundee United, they had won the cup, but they had of course won the cup, but they hadn't been troubling the score. Like the 80s, Dundee United are in the running for things. Maybe not the league by the end of it, but you certainly won't be surprised if they're up there in the cups and spoilers in the league. But Aberdeen were the treble runners-up in our treble year in 92-93, and the second best team in Scotland by some considerable distance. Aberdeen's fall was rapid, and once it began, I don't know whether it was panic. I don't know whether it was just bad decisions compounding bad decisions. You see it a lot at clubs when they begin to think we need to do something, and then there's that, right, we need to swing for the fences each time. Manchester United are a good example of that, I think, over the last 10 years, where one thing will take us back, and it's like, well, actually, no, you need to build for a little while. And generally what happens is they have to hit a bit of a nadir before the patience is there to say, look, we need to build back. But yeah, if you wanted to know where Scottish football was, then this is, the 80s were over by now. The whole new firm thing. I mean, there was talk in sort of 85, say, that Aberdeen and Dundee United, this was going to be the new century. This was going to lead us into the 21st century, and that the old firm domination was completely over. And sure, you would get good Rangers and Celtic teams from time to time winning trophies, but the hegemony was completely gone. And yet here you are by the middle of the 90s, and the two poster children of that are now fighting relegation. Aberdeen should have been relegated in the 90s, escaped it on technicalities twice. Dundee United were, of course, relegated, and since, really, if we're being honest, been a bit of a yo-yo team in Scotland, with the odd good season. They won the cup in 2010, I know, but it just, I think the speed of it, I think the whole thing, though, when you think about it, sort of flamed really quickly, didn't it? And I think now at the juncture we're at, we can probably look back and say a perfect storm caused by both clubs getting their greatest ever managers at the right time.
Yeah.
And now that's gone. But honestly, when we were wee boys, Martyn, there was talk that Aberdeen and Dundee United had reinvented the Scottish football wheel, and that things would never go back the way they were. And of course, things have not only gone back the way they are, they've now closed the door behind them.
Well, Aberdeen would bounce back from that defeat. They would win their next game, which was at home to Celtic, and in doing so, actually confirmed Rangers as Premier League champions before we took on Hibs on the Sunday, live on STV. Sunday the 16th of April. It was 1-1, somehow 1-1 with 5 minutes remaining. I've absolutely no idea how that we were not ahead in this game. Again, Smith had deliberately asked, wish he'd asked it a bit sooner, right enough, to play with us kind of bags of style and freedom and creativity. Rangers were superb. Hibs had a great equaliser through Michael O'Neill, but Rangers were so good, and eventually 5 minutes to go, 2 goals in the last 5 minutes from Geraint and Miko, 2 beautiful goals actually. Capped the kind of performance, a deserved win with a kind of deserved margin. And gave that title party a bit of energy. Alan, your memories of number 7, a wee bit different to that kind of weird 0-0 draw with Dundee, or the defeat obviously at Hibs, and it was at Hibs, wasn't it, the season before, and that kind of drab finish. This had been another difficult season in many ways, as we just talked about, but there was a bit of fun about this particular title party, I thought.
You're right, as you say, they were expressing themselves, obviously, because Celtic had been beaten, before. But as you say, cracking game, a cracking game in itself. And you're right, Martyn, it could have been 6 or 7-1. Some of the stuff we were playing was great, and as you say, at the end as well, it was 7. And I think even for others who didn't want to jinx it, I think you've got in the back of your mind now, right? That's us get 7 now. Yeah. You know what I mean? We're getting we can almost touch the thing. And then obviously after that, it just becomes that usual. It's like winning a tie at golf, Martin, isn't it? And then you play the next hole and you put 2 of them out of bounds. Yeah. I mean, we do okay. I think we beat Kilmarnock 1-0, and then we just.
Oh, we phone it.
But the actual,
we do phone it.
We did, yeah.
We'll come to that.
But great atmosphere at the end. And again, I think from the video as well, it's the usual. The kids are all in the middle of the park and so on, and certainly compared to the previous season as well. Yeah.
Just a wee bit, yeah. I mean, there's no jeopardy about it, but it was. No. It was just a lot more fun than the previous seasons. Walter reflected on that. He was having no part of Rangers being involved in this kind of national counselling session about the state of the game. I feel aggrieved at times that this club is not given credit for what we're trying to achieve here. We're attracting almost full houses to our games and try to bring good quality players to the club, the kind of players that people want to watch. Yet we are dragged into this talk about a country in crisis. I don't think that's fair. It certainly does not reflect what we're doing at Ibrox. And then, as you've mentioned, Alan, he finishes his interview with a nod to really this bigger prize. Every year we've won the title. My admiration for what Celtic achieved in going 9 years in a row grows. It was a tremendous achievement, and all we can do is hope that we can match or maybe beat it. It must have been so wearying for Smith to win a league title and have it not really recognised in its own right, because by now it is firmly part of something else. It's part of a quest. It's like climbing to the top of the mountain just to see that it extends further beyond the clouds. Richard Gough, maybe the bit of mischief, but maybe there's a bit of validity in his point when he said, I think you have to examine the 2 achievements. Obviously 9 titles in succession was a marvellous thing for Celtic, but that was in the old First Division. This time you're looking at 7 Premier Division titles in succession. In my view, there's a big difference, and I think it is a record that will last a very long time. Now, given, David, that half of the old First Division in the 60s was part-time, it's not a ridiculous point to make, but Gough knew that that wouldn't hold any water in this city. We knew what that ultimate goal was. You've got even money now. The Rangers will make it 9 in a row, 64 to go, one better.
Yeah, look, there's been 3 9 in a row in Scottish football, and ours is the best one, and it's unarguable. I'm sorry, it's a fact, because 20-team league, several part-time during the 60s, 70s. Rangers in this era playing the teams 4 times, and then of course we weren't in the league for most of Celtic, so yeah, there you go. It's just a fact. Scientists will prove me correct on that one. I think there you go. So look, you nailed it there when you said it must have been incredibly frustrating that they got to a league title. And to be honest, what we did is enjoyed that Hibs day and then went right next year. And even then it was going to be and then 9. And that was, I suppose, a victim. They became a victim of their own success. The expectations. Sure. I wonder if we'll begin to see something similar in England with Manchester City. That maybe we're already at that point where people are saying, well, yeah, you won the league, but... and
funny you should mention Manchester City about winning the league, but there's Europe, and that's again
similar. Yeah,
no,
but you're absolutely
really realistic.
Right. No, we weren't expecting to win it, but we did expect to do better than we'd been doing. But there was a definite sense of, and I remember this very specifically, that titles after the 9 in a row, all of them, in my experience, personal experience, and I'd be interested to hear you guys and interested to hear Alan's. When I was, an adult, I've celebrated and enjoyed them more because I don't know why. Maybe the expectation. I still expect Rangers to win the league every summer, but the And I'm not just talking about 55 here, folks. I'm talking about 2003, 2005, the three under Walter. I thought maybe I began to realise maybe we just didn't have the same advantages that we had, and my expectations were scaled by that.
Is it not the same, David, what we've just talked about, that you can't enjoy this one, for example, and I think anything after 5, to be honest, you certainly 6 and 7, you cannot enjoy in its own right because it is subsumed into something bigger, and you can't enjoy that yet because we've not come to the end of that yet. And therefore, there just isn't an enjoyment of these titles. Now, we'll talk about next season. When we get to it, there's something a bit different because it was dramatic. And there was an actual title race, which I guess provides its own energy. But certainly 6 and 7.
This one, Martyn, obviously we play Celtic, come in, go to Hampden, and for once we get beat 3-0. It was a shocker. But even at that, normally I would be devastated. That would be me for ages. And it was like, well, as Davie said, we're going to win the league next year. It just became, and I think you also had that in your mind. It was
like a beat by Partick Thistle at an end of season game, that Celtic defeat.
It's like,
you're right.
Whatever.
You're both right. Yeah. See, what made 8 and 9 special is that it was a fight, and that was somebody was up against you. It would have been absolutely unforgivable for any Rangers manager, Walter Smith, whoever, not to have won the league titles that you've just discussed, Martyn. Those two, it really would have. And it was almost impossible not to, because had we been struggling, look, let's go and sign Tottenham Hotspur's Scotland international striker. He'll come in and bang them in. And that was the sort of advantage that we had, that we could always go and just take it away. So it would have been, as I say, completely unforgivable to me. And maybe because of that, because it's not a case of you get credit for doing this, it's more you get loads and loads of grief for not doing it. But I do think, 8 and 9 were celebrated. There was still very much an eye on. But these two titles were basically, we get a piss up and a bit closer rather than, we're champions. And maybe that's what it is. And maybe there's that. Maybe there was that sense of winning the league isn't enough here because there's no challenge in it. And we mentioned City. City have had a challenge. They've had to be very good to do it. Record, but if they were to start running away with it the way we were and having it wrapped up by March, and so in a way, Celtic coming back for 8 and 9 didn't feel it sometimes, but it actually probably.
But we actually had the upper game.
Well, we shall talk about that in a minute as well. We phone in the rest of the season. We have that one at Kilmarnock. We get beat by Motherwell at home. Then this disgraceful performance at Hampden. Celtic win 3-0.
I don't think we were sober that day, and I mean that. I think they'd been out in the piss.
I wasn't.
We have a 1-1 draw at home to Thistle to actually get the trophy. But it's, as I said, it's phoned in. I'll come back to this in a minute. But the other one that's maybe worth noting on 1st of May was Scott Nisbet's testimonial, due to be Davie Cooper's final ever game of football. It was a Rangers current team against the kind of Rangers old boys international select. Mo Johnson was coming back, Terry Butcher was coming back, obviously controversial figures in different ways, and to be managed by Graham Sunus, who had said that he was coming back to do it, but the last time you would see him in a dugout. We'd see him manage any team. I really don't have a lot of interest in the game any longer, and managing a club does not hold any particular appeal for me, he said on the 20th of April.
Fibber.
On the 21st of May, he was appointed as manager of Galatasaray. Can you remember that night? I think it was a Monday night, May bank holiday, and it was like Nizzy very much loved, and listen, Sunus respected him. He rejected a few offers because, we've talked about this in the shows. Sunus's reception that night, I think, was frosty to say the least. It wasn't outright hostility, but it was clear that all was not yet forgiven. Is that just my memory?
No, I think you're absolutely right there.
I think there's a bit of something to it. It wasn't what it would be now, for example.
No, and I think if I can pinpoint, and I'm getting outside the remit of the show a little. I don't think the warmth of the renaissance of Sunus's reputation as this god of Rangers again. He was on BBC Scotland on the panel for the win at Parkhead. Wee Rod scored, and late in the game, horrendous night.
Right, yeah.
Foss was superb. Moore and Amo were superb, and he kept saying "we." Now, you didn't do that on telly. You didn't do ex-pros providing punditry was the norm, and everyone understood they would have maybe leanings for certain clubs, they're their old clubs, but you maintained a kind of professionalism throughout it. He kept referring to Rangers as we, and I remember that getting a lot of traction at the time, and a kind of smirk and a smile, and I think that's maybe where the thaw comes. Anyway, this end of the season was pretty poor. An interesting point and follow. Again, just talking about this issue of entertainment and what we're being beamed into our homes. I have succumbed to the temptations of Sky TV and now the power to watch games with more verve and simply switch channels if they show the lack of interest like that in the recent Old Firm game. And someone else after the 3-0 defeat. Tactically, we're at shambles. The manager has to get it right next season or he should be told to step aside and make way for fresh blood. Big talk. There was no way David Murray was going to make that kind of decision on Smith's future when the odds of domestic success were so good. But I think European fortunes had to change. But who were going to be the players that would facilitate that? I don't know if you remember in the morning of that Hibs game, David and Alan, when we're going to be kind of crowned champions, if you like, the Sunday tabloids being alive with the rumours that Dennis Bergkamp was coming to Rangers from Inter. That story never had legs. The fact that Arsenal paid £7.5 million for it probably explains why not. But this was probably the first time that you could describe Rangers transfer talk, maybe since Sunus arrived, as silly season. It was wild. I think even the summer of '86 is in distant shadow compared to this. You could make an 11. This is just in the April and May, the end of this season, and 11 of the names that Rangers were linked with. Mark Bosnich, Stephen Wright, Davy Weir, Alan Stubbs, who was very highly thought of at Bolton, Stevie Crawford, Jonas Tern, before he got injured and then we bought him, David Platt, Dennis Bergkamp, Gary McAllister, who was a shoe-in apparently, Florian Raduchoy, who would go to West Ham and just shop, Thomas Scuravi, and on the bench, Jesper Blomqvist, Scott Booth and Dougie Friedman. Any of the names there? Wet your whistle.
There's some players in there, and Scott Booth. The guys who the guys who got me excited were Tern, who Scotland seemed to play Sweden every 20 minutes in the 90s, and every time they did, he was absolutely
stood out, didn't he?
Fantastic. Yeah, he was magnificent, and he was genuinely regarded and respected as one of the top midfielders in the world at the time. So Jonas Tern I was very interested in. Raduchoy I thought was exciting, pace to burn, good player. Thomas Scuravi was one that was linked a lot with us, going right back to that Italian 90. And then he did really well in Italy, actually. He wasn't, I know there's maybe a tendency in the UK to see him as 1990 as a World Cup name, but he did have a good career. He was a target man, a very good player. Dougie Friedman was getting some rave reviews. He was young at the time, and
loved the Bears.
Yep, he loved the Bears, and there was still talk. There was talk about big English clubs being interested in him as well. Stephen Wright, I like the idea of a great deal because one, we didn't have a right back. I thought worthy of the name, and two, it was Davy Robertson too. That was kind of the way I remember it being talked about. It's like, yep, we'll just...
Gary McAllister was always, wasn't he? He was linked
Gary McAllister was a shoe-in. Gary McAllister had been told by Walter Smith that there was another midfielder he was after, and if he didn't get him and he didn't think he would sign Gary McAllister. But I will... I'm not going to name the other one, but spoiler, come back next week. But Gary McAllister was genuinely, he would have been brilliant, right? And I can't believe that Rangers, the amount of money we pished away over the 90s, that Gary McAllister was available for $2.5 million, and we didn't just think, when in the entire 90s?
Murray but even the year before, Murray had told the press he was coming, and Leeds were like, No, he's not. And you can't tap players up in public like that. And Rangers were fined for doing it.
We did it with Jury as well. We get fined for that.
Oh, yeah, it was incredible. But anyway, it was mayhem. But given the majority of the players in that list were foreign, Rangers would still struggle to put in 11 out in the Champions League.
Yeah, that's
it would be
right.
technically kind of professional.
That's why Booth and Friedman are on that. Booth
yes,
and
exactly,
are on that list.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
Yeah, but Murray, however, like quite a few British chairmen at this time, were speculating that the days of the foreigner rule were coming to an end, and in the April of 1995, a relatively obscure Belgian footballer called Jean-Marc Bosman was deliberating over whether to accept a settlement agreement from UEFA and other governing bodies, or proceed to the European Court of Justice, where his case for breach of contract under the Treaty of Rome was due to begin, with clubs all over Europe waiting to pounce on UEFA should the decision go against them. He would choose the latter, and so doing change the world of football forever. We will come back to that. But a relaxation was unlikely to occur before the new season, so even if it did, Rangers, how are they going to finance such an improvement, fans asked? How are we going to buy all these players, Mr. Chairman, with few valuable assets that you could trade? Well, Murray was very clear when he was answering those questions. That was pretty much it. There'll be a 5% increase in season ticket prices right across the board, designed to bring in an extra £8 million that summer, as well as offering fans to buy into what he called Ready for the Future, where they could pay a one-off figure of £399, which would go into a player transfer reserve fund, as well as Blue Heaven, development scheme to fill in the corners of the Govan stand, bringing the capacity up to 51,000, installing two of the biggest screens in Britain so that Rangers could show away games, and turning all the seats in the stadium blue. He wanted £12 million to spend on new players that summer. Murray called it a crossroads and said, "We now have to go through a major transition as a club. We're going to spend another £4 million in the stadium by August, falling on the £33 million already spent on it, and a net £40 million spent on players. We have to go to our supporters to seek additional funds. Not all of them can afford that, and there will be some who will be cynical about this, but no one has been forced into it, and we would like to hope that there will be those who wish to do so. This £399 would give the fan the right to buy the season ticket for their seat at Ibrox for the next 25 years. Their name on the seat, you will see many of those when you go to Ibrox just now. A certificate, recognise a contribution, the right to transfer their seat within the immediate family, 10% discounts on the Rangers shop and Argyle House restaurant, and a free weekend ticket worth up to £40 for the Rangers pre-season tournament this summer, which would include Tottenham, Steaua Bucharest and Sampdoria. Murray's gift for taking money from fans wasn't limited to the ordinary punter, and this is incredible. In April, he persuaded the Edinburgh property developer and Rangers fan, Ian Russell, to spend £1 million to become what was called an associate director. The title held absolutely no power whatsoever. In fact, it's debatable whether any normal director held any power at this particular time. Murray said this, presumably with a straight face. It is another form of sponsorship. I think Ian Russell had already sponsored Rangers quite a lot. Another form of sponsorship, associate directors will be a sounding board for directors. These are Rangers people, and they can give us their thoughts. Well, how about that, Davey? I mean, that's a headline grabber, but I do remember Ready for the Future, Blue Heaven, as well as a 5% increase in season tickets. If you want big players, chuck us £400. I can see how well that would go down now.
I love the idea when I hear it, and I hear it a lot from people, that our Rangers just see us as cash machines. And it's not that I hear it and I say that's a silly thing that you're saying. It's what I tend to think is, are you new around here? Yes, Rangers do. Rangers have done this all my life. Rangers have gone to the fans for everything. Who built Ibrox, Alan?
That'll be us through the Rangers pools, eh?
Rangers fans have, for the long, there are many things that certain clubs in Scotland can claim that they were at the forefront of. Nobody can claim they were at the forefront of tipping the fans upside down and using a magnet to get the change out their pockets like Rangers. And Murray was a salesman, and he was brilliant. On a personal note about that Blue Heaven, my mum handles the money because my dad is useless with it. I think he was in charge of it at the start of the marriage. It went tits up. He's never been allowed to do it again. And that was, before I came into the world. So And I remember my dad one night asking my mum to, just asking her if he could go up to the bank, because you had to go up to the bank to lift over a certain amount in those days, folks.
That's right. Yes,
And he was going to lift £798, and he was going to pay for me and him to get the season ticket. And she went, okay, right, well, that's a lot. What do you get for it? And he went through that list of benefits, and she went,
Oh, yeah.
£400 for the privilege of selling
To buy
you
it.
the ticket that you already have.
You buy it.
And he said, no, but it means that you can buy it every year. And you've had it for years. You buy it every year anyway. So my mum my mum wonderfully just drilled it down to, Tommy, what you're asking me for is £399
No.
to get your name in the seat. Take a fucking magic marker and write you and Davey's names on the seat, and that'll do. So we didn't get it. But look, I mean,
No.
I will give Murray credit in one way, and this is something that the current Rangers board could learn from. Newsflash, folk, football clubs will always take your money. That's what they do, right? That's their job. And they will always do it. Murray at least said, we need your money to go and do this, this, and this, right?
Yeah.
Rangers current board, stop using phrases like best in class and all that tenuous, airy bullshit. Tell us, we want to buy some players. If you put money into this fund, we'll go and buy players. And to be fair to Murray, that summer he buys players. Good players come in.
He does. The
Now,
Rangers are tooling up for sure.
Where
he
I
doesn't
fall
put
out
his
with-
own money in.
Yeah, that's where I fall out with money. Murray had this, and but what? You
Everybody
get
else.
Rangers fans.
And he said, "Look, I could sell some of the stock, but I don't think the fans would like that. They trust me."
Yeah,
Joe
yeah.
Lewis, 20 million quid or something,
Joe
wasn't it? 20 million
Dave
quid for
King
Joe
gave him
Lewis.
20
Yeah.
million.
Oh, that's coming
Joe
later.
Lewis gave him 40 million. He was brilliant
Aye.
at it, but he gave the impression that it's the phrase, isn't it? A 5 or a 10, it's that one. But and Rangers fans bought this, and even to this day, you'll get Rangers fans saying, well, he brought certain players to the club, and you're like, no, we did that. It wasn't his money. But
Yeah.
so that's.
It was David Best's money. Big David Best. He done the bid for the future. Poor David.
So
yeah.
did-
Well,
so
Benny
the big
did. He did because, listen, I have some sympathy in recent years when fans will bemoan and want rich men to pay for their hobby. Right? Well, what do you spend on a trip? What would you spend on trips through the year? Put it in a transfer fund if you want your £4 million striker or whatever. There's some logic there. I want to ask this question because Rangers do tool up. We'll talk about that when we return for the next season, but they do. Celtic, asking them to lose against lower league opposition in the second cup final of the season was probably a bit too much. They beat Airdrie 1-0 to win the Scottish Cup, their first trophy in 6 years. Wasn't a particularly great game, very nervy, as you would expect for a club that's already been beaten by lower league opposition on an absolute drought. Their new boy scored, Van Hooijdonk, only goal of the game. And probably a realisation that a reliance on a single player was, as it had been for the last 2 seasons, Hateley, then Lauder, was probably no longer going to do. It's the first season that Celtic had got the better of us in head-to-head since 87-88. And that the ease of that win at Hampden was very much what was putting the buzz back around the place. And Celtic put an advert out the week after the Scottish Cup final for application for season tickets for their new and improved Parkhead. Celtic winning the 10th Scottish Cup is only the beginning. We are back on form. The Rangers simply had to react, and buying 1 or 2 players wouldn't be enough. But as it would turn out, despite that buzz around the place, it would be nearly 2 years before Celtic defeated Rangers again, nearly 3 before they did it again in the league. The answer is both, guys, but in true history student fashion, to what extent was that splurge in the summer to be better in Europe or to tool up for an actual challenge, David?
Bit of both. I think that I kind of, maybe I'm a wee bit cynical about these now, is I tend to think that every summer our spend was for 2 weeks was going to be to be better in Europe before we inevitably get knocked out. That's what we told ourselves when the players arrived in and we looked at it in paper and we said yes. And then we never learned, did we, in the 90s, that 5-6 new players don't gel by the first game of the season against a team who generally were halfway through their season when we played them, and we would get beat. So I think it's both. I think there was a realization that the team was, as you say, Martyn, it was massively, the squad was uneven now, to say the least. That there had been a lot of bit part players who'd come in and done well, but we were trying to move away from the era of, needing a Fraser Wishart to come in and needing to go and buy Alan McLaren after 2 months. We wanted to sensibly, if you like, do what Sunus did, which is, I've got my core squad, and then I'll have a couple of positions that I maybe need to look at each year. And we wanted to move back towards that. And the business in the summer, I won't go into it because, as you say, we'll do it in a couple of weeks. But the business in the summer, I thought, was a lot less kind of hate 'em, scare 'em than what we had seen previously, where there was this sense of always adding, always building, but a lot of it was short term. A lot of it was, we'll bring in this guy because we're short of players. And then the squad, when you looked at it, it was kind of bloated, and there were only so many players that you thought a guaranteed starter. Whereas I think if you go back to 88, 89, 90, and you're looking at those teams, everyone seemed to be bought with a purpose. In these squad paddings, you very rarely saw them. You would get the guys, Dave McKellar, comes in for, because we need a third goalkeeper. But we just seemed to be filling the team with a lot of these guys, and a lot of it was injuries, of course. But we seemed to be very unsettled, and never did we seem to name the same team. I think that the first half of the 90s, you would kind of struggle to say that's the Rangers 11 when everyone's fit. After 92, 93 till the middle of the next season, really, I think you struggle to say if everyone's fit, those are the 11. Whereas with Sunus, you could do that. You could say if everyone's fit, that's who's in the team. So I like the business of summer, but I think you're right. Although, look, we always told ourselves every summer, this is for the European challenge. We'll do it the season after this. We'll do it the season after it again. Every year when we tooled up, we were going to do it. And I think that what we avoided doing, because something you've mentioned in this show, something you've mentioned all through the series, because everything has to be subsumed at the altar of 9 in a row, 10 in a row, that we never really looked at the reasons why we had to keep going out every summer and doing a major refit.
Yeah. Alan, we look back by the nature of how history works, and it looks as if Rangers have treaded water. We have won twice in 2 seasons in the league against Celtic, and now they've won something, and it's like, right, they're coming back. Let's kind of do the best. And as it would turn out, we're going to play them 6 times in the next season. It's a challenge. It's a successful one, and we've got a great record. But these are tight games, and it's a proper race. Do we know that in the summer of '95? I guess again why I asked the question. Europe is, David Murray's not talking about, although he does say Celtic are coming back. Saw Kilmarnock doing good things in terms of the structure of the club and whatever. Scottish football is kind of showing a bit of growth again, but it's about the Champions League, that you need to be in the Champions League, need to be in the Champions League. Are we concerned? Can you remember that Saturday afternoon? Disappointed, of course, that the Airdrie didn't do what Wraith Rovers could do. Thinking, maybe there's something in that.
Yeah, I had already, sounds defeatist, but kind of given up. I think reality had kicked in my head about the Europe. As David said, we were going to bring in additional quality, which was good. But I don't know whether subconsciously that reference to the 9 was kind of really making my decision for me. I thought we're going to bring in better quality of players, which would get us over domestically. I was conscious as well that Celtic were beginning to, as you say, financially they had done a wee bit, with the stadium. They were bringing some players in. So I was conscious of that one. I thought that we would have done okay league-wise, because I felt that, like us as supporters, and the team kind of dialing it in, I thought if there was a more challenge, we would rise to it. So I felt as if we were okay domestically. But to be honest with you, in terms of Europe, I just felt that we didn't do that whole system thing. We were sprinkling new quality in again, because we didn't have the luxury of, let's try and change the structure and let's try and even have project. Now you would go, that guy's a project player for 2 or 3. And I felt the short-termism of kind of we've got to win the league, it kind of really, it kind of took over the let's do something different in Europe.
I thought that Celtic were better, but I didn't think they would be running us to the last day. No, I didn't think we needed
the penultimate week of the season. Yeah, I don't think I felt that either, and I think there's maybe a bit of casting back because the narrative is nice. I'm sure you don't want to fuck this up when you're that close to this kind of becoming a holy grail, and how healthy that is something I think we've talked about and we'll talk about again, because it is insular, but you're also allowed to enjoy and want to be champions of your country again and again and again. So it's a kind of, there's a tension there. But we'll come back to that. The final question for 94-95, gents. I use the title God Complex not as a kind of play on the we're not worthy thing and the nicknames that Laudrup got, but because how healthy is this over-reliance on an individual? Give the ball to Brian. Thousands coming to actually watch him rather than a Rangers team. This is a team sport after all. The two players play in very different circumstances, but both Cooper and Laudrup were expected at times to carry a team in their backs. Too often the only creative outlet at the club. Now, gifted heroes with carefree spirits are fine. In fact, I would argue that they're necessary, but depends on one player is never sustainable in the long term because better sides can isolate them and leave the rest exposed. I've always had a theory that this British obsession with the hero can be traced back to Roy Race, Roy the Rovers, and, don't worry about working hard at creating a system, lads. Roy will bail us out, or Brian Robson, or Brian Laudrup. That season's Champions League final, held in Vienna, told, I think, a more modern story about visionary heroes. Rinus Michels and Arrigo Sacchi were not direct combatants that night. They were most likely watching on in the stands, but their ideas and their coaching legacies were going head-to-head as Ajax defeated Milan 1-0 to be crowned champions of Europe. I would say the two strongest 11s that have ever took the field on, Europe's most prestigious stage, that Champions League final, and not one player, no matter how good, stood tall above them all. David and then Alan, is maybe a lesson that the direction of travel at the top level, that technical excellence is required all around the pitch. It is not simply someone will bail us out. It's about the whole.
Yeah, 100%. And it's not that this is not just a British idea, although, as you say, we love the idea, but Maradona winning the World Cup on his own, that kind of thing, if you get somebody who's good enough. I'll give you another example of a club who didn't get it quickly enough. Inter Milan would buy Ronaldo from Barcelona, and they would build an entire side around funneling the ball to Ronaldo in certain positions, and we all know what happened. Unfortunately, to Ronaldo, he breaks his knee, he suffers 2 serious knee injuries, and that entire squad was useless. It was high priced, but it was never quoted to do anything because it was a machine built for one player, and it didn't function in the slightest without him. It wouldn't work anymore. And football being football, players sometimes get injured. They sometimes suffer losses of form. They sometimes have issues off the field. They're human beings. I'll always take a great set. A modern example to me is Barcelona, that wonderful team that Pep Guardiola created at Barcelona. And it had Lionel Messi in it, and he was doing outrageous things. He wasn't doing outrageous things and winning them games on his own. Occasionally, sure, a tight game here or there, maybe, but it was the side. That side was full of brilliant players playing a system, and it had the star on top. I don't think it's sustainable in any major league or any half-decent league now. Yeah, every club's going to have their most important player. Every club's going to have their star. That happens, right? But you have to have a system now. Tactics have evolved to such a way, because I think defensive systems have evolved and fitness has evolved to such a way that any team should be able to work out, how to get in shape, keep you out and press. And we've seen that with Rangers opponents. in the last few seasons that sometimes against very average sides we've struggled very badly, because the one thing they have in common is, well, they're organised. I don't think it works, and I think that we all have said on this show, and the listeners have all said, how fondly they remember Brian Laudrup this year, how wonderful he was, and yet how absolutely dreadful and boring the season was. That's where football was. And I remember that Ajax team, the semi-final, they played Panathinaikos, and they actually lost at home, a shock result. They didn't play very well at all, and it was actually a bit of a harbinger of that Greek side winning the Euros. That Panathinaikos put about 18 behind the ball, and they went to Greece in the second leg, and it was one of the best performances I have ever seen, where they all had about 300 touches each. Everybody was involved. The ball moved at lightning pace, and you just thought, we can't do that. We do not have the, can you imagine, Alec Cleland turning inside? And it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. I mean, listeners, we Davey and I in another chat we're talking about this. I don't think there is a stronger 22 than that 95 Champions League final in a European Cup Champions League final. If you think you have another one, please let me know. But when your worst player is maybe Marco Simeone, you're doing pretty well, Alan. But does this go? I mean, that final with two well matched, well drilled, just efficiency everywhere. Does that run contrary to the romantic yearning that we have for a Cooper and a Laudrup? In a couple of years, we're going to see George Weah take the ball from one end of the pitch to the other for Milan against Verona. But those goals, we talked about that Laudrup goal against Dundee United a couple of weeks ago, you're not going to see many of them as football develops, because it isn't about the individual.
No, it's totally changed. Domestically, again, we'll get away with it for a bit by doing it. But that's what I'm saying. Even the previous couple of years, everything moved on. So we were suddenly playing in Europe. And as you say, they were so ahead of us in terms of tactics and kind of shape and how to nullify us. And so that was going to happen. Ultimately, I think what was going to happen as well in some parts of the domestic game, when different tactics came in and some foreign coaches as well, we came a wee bit of a cropper. And I think it wasn't actually until Advocat came, believe it or not, although again we were still behind in Europe, that we seemed to have a bit more of a shape and things did move on. But at this point in time, Davey's right, it was like thank God Brian's playing, for this one, and potentially maybe other people that we've got. But by this time, everything had just gone. And again, unfortunately, as you've said, because of the 9 being sitting there, it's like okay, we might need to strip back, we might need to look at this, we might need to change. But the biggie was you can't because you can't fuck up the 9, and that was I think that's the position that we were in.
Also, Martyn, here's one thing that's different in this era from even 5 years before. We now do know what the Joneses are doing next door. We're watching the Champions League on ITV, it's free. We're watching Serie A every Sunday on Channel 4, it's free. And a lot of us are now getting Sky and we're watching the EPL every week. So in the 80s, you didn't really know what was going on. You heard about these players, but you only saw them at a World Cup, right? No, even really at Euros, you saw them at a World Cup.
Now, but not every week, David.
Now I know what that Ajax team is playing like, right? And I see them 6 times between January and the end. I see that Juventus team week. I see that Milan team you're speaking about. Suddenly our horizons go up, and we're like, no, this isn't good enough anymore. You can't just keep playing like this, and that's why we get this demand.
And we spoke about that in our live show at Halfway Point. I've written a chapter about the impact of this TV explosion, because you're absolutely right. And it's everywhere. And I'm not even joking when I include Championship Manager in that, because especially my generation, awareness is there. And Walter, as these years go on, gets it in the neck for, well, why are we not like that? Why haven't you signed that boy from Georgia that we're all aware of? God. Because I signed him for my Luton Town team, and we did this, blah blah blah. So it's everything is changing. The footballing world is getting bigger, and because of what we've talked about in terms of the 9 and everything else, we're getting smaller, really, and we're maybe just playing the game. Gentlemen, thank you very much for tonight. Thank you for this particular season. was wondering how to come at it, and I hope we've captured the kind of main themes throughout. I know this was a slightly difficult episode to do given the subject matter, but thank you, Alan.
No, you're welcome. It was a toughie with the Davie one, but it was good as well that we got a chance to kind of just express our, kind of thoughts and our feelings for him as well. But no, thanks, Martyn. I enjoyed it overall, yeah.
Thank you, David.
I'd just like to echo what Alan said and what you said at the start. I found this more difficult than I thought I might, going back and reliving, because that's what we do in this show. We try to go back to how we felt then. That was a sore one, I hope that the listeners enjoyed it. It was a painfully honest episode, but I think I'm glad we did it.
So am I. We are 3/4 of the way there now, ladies and gents, and we're not going to do a live show next week, but we are going to do a Q&A. We'll put up a separate thread later on in the week, so if there's things that we haven't touched upon yet that you have a burning desire to know what myself, Davey, maybe another one of the regulars thinks, then please let us know, and we'll recap on where we've come through since January. My word, it really has been a bit of an epic, but it's always good. There's so many comments come up and questions come up in the thread. I would like to just spend some time on those, so if you want to repeat those, please, or come up with something new, there will be a thread for you to do that, and it builds me a wee bit of time for writing, which is much needed. So thanks. If you could do that, that'd be great. So that's us for 94-95. Walter Smith was often agitated by transfer speculation, even though it's a normal part of a manager's job. In the summer of 1992, he rolled his eyes at the link to Lothar Matthäus, suggesting that if the media was to go through the M's, then perhaps Maradona would be next. He duly treated the weekly list of new names around this time with the usual straight bat. All except one. On Friday, 5th of May, the Daily Star ran yet another fanciful transfer link, but by the Monday, Smith had been forced to confirm that a deal was in place with the players' club. It was now all about the man in question. Not since Maurice Johnson, 6 years before. Not Loudrop, not Bowley, nor Haitley, nor Duncan Ferguson had Rangers been close to signing a player that generated so much thrill and cynicism in equal measure. The spark that would re-energise this dressing room, or another expensive liability, both in body and in mind. The debate raged all summer long, both for those who were excited and for those who were frozen in fear. Before the season was even out, Rangers were making a huge statement of intent. Gaza was coming. Until next week, bye for now.